has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
Who are you?
I'm no one. Follow me.
Nothing will stand in our way. I'll show them the dark side.
I don't know your name.
Finn, what's yours?
I'm Ray.
You might need this.
Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
My Nerd World.
And welcome to episode number 35 of the My Nerd World Star Wars podcast. I am your host, John Justice, and that is probably my favorite spot. That was the 60-second TV spot, and it was the only spot that included the Jedi Steps in the commercial. Of course, the Jedi Steps is the theme that was used at the end of The Force Awakens as Rey was walking up the steps to find Luke Skywalker at the end of the film. And that spot, now after seeing the movie 6 times now, to me, probably captured the emotion of the movie better than any of the other advertisements, in my opinion. So glad you're with the podcast. Thank you so much for downloading it. We actually have some emails that we're going to be getting to a little bit later on in the podcast. We're going to talk Rogue One a bit. Getting excited over Rogue One, also getting concerned over Rogue One, and I'll explain. It's a difficult task now, as if The Force Awakens wasn't already a difficult task to complete, which it's now done successfully. Rogue One almost has an even a more difficult task ahead of itself, as it's going to be compared and picked apart, much like The Force Awakens was. The Force Awakens, and we'll kick off the podcast talking about this angle of it, has broken records. It's debuted in China. $53 million China debut. That is a record, a record 2-day open for the People's Republic. And this is the last major market to host the latest Star Wars adventure. I have an article here in front of me from Variety. Its opening ranks the best Saturday or Sunday bow ever in China. The Disney distribution chief said that for many Chinese moviegoers, The Force Awakens will actually serve as the first Star Wars film they've ever seen. And that is interesting when you look at what they've done with The Force Awakens. And probably The Force Awakens' biggest criticism is that it was too closely aligned with the original trilogy, which personally for me, I find really quite funny, because wasn't the biggest complaint over the prequels that the prequels weren't at all like the original trilogy, and now the people that are complaining about The Force Awakens are saying that it's too much like the original trilogy. But when you look at it in terms of a global franchise, which it is, and what J.J. Abrams has said since the beginning, that they felt like they needed to go backwards to go forwards, that they needed to reestablish the franchise so that they can then propel it forward into this new, post George Lucas world, into the new Disney world. And look, it makes a lot of sense. I know that there are still those that criticize, and that really is when it comes down to it. apart from the questions that are raised with it, that really is the only criticism that I've seen of the film. And personally, I think it's a stretch. And obviously, based off the numbers that the movie has made now, it's rather irrelevant if some people felt that way. It still is. I mean, I've fallen in love with this movie. It is a fantastic movie. It is so much fun to watch. And when you hear J.J. Abrams make the statements that they had to go backwards to go forwards, it makes sense to bring The Force Awakens, Episode 7, to bring it to theaters and try to do something too new or too different. You can make an argument that 30 years down the line in a galaxy far, far away, that they perhaps should have progressed farther in terms of technology. And, I mean, almost as if the sequel trilogy to the original trilogy should look more like the prequel trilogy, right? We talked about this last week with my special guest, Andrew Langer. But for what Disney needed to do, they needed to bring it back to the fold. They needed to recapture the magic. And so it was a balancing act. They had to bring just enough of the original trilogy while updating a few things to make sure that it stays fresh, which they did, while still being able to provide something for the hardcore fans to grab onto. George Lucas didn't criticize the movie, but he said his biggest problem with it was that it didn't move forward. That he wanted the movies to be different. Every movie that he made, he wanted to advance it a little bit further and wanted it to have a different feel. And I can understand that, but that's not what Disney needed to do. Disney paid $4 billion from George Lucas to make this movie and to make these movies, and so it had to reestablish things. It couldn't take risks. Now it can. Now we can get to Episode 8 and hand it off to Rian Johnson and then Colin Trevorrow for Episode 9, and they can advance things further. But, you really do, you have to their credit, they did do just enough. I mean, the X-Wings look just different enough. The Star Destroyers look just different enough. The outfits, the uniforms, new aliens. And that's probably the one thing, and I actually heard another podcast complain about this angle of it, and that was that there weren't a lot of original trilogy aliens in this movie, that they introduced a bunch of new aliens. And so it makes me laugh because as Star Wars fans, we're so picky. And it's what makes Star Wars special. It's why there are all these podcasts out there. It's why I do my podcast, because it's fun to talk about. It's fun to get into the nuances of it. But it really is quite astonishing how nitpicky we as fans are, and how the community is. Let me give you a couple of just quick examples, because I got a lot I got to get to, and I'm already realizing that I'm just kind of off and running here. I was at the grocery store. This was last week before last, maybe. And I'm wearing a Star Wars Force Awakens t-shirt, as always. And I'm in the checkout line by myself. No. I'm sorry. I was with the family. The family was with me. And I get out of the checkout line, and there's a guy who works, older guy, older gentleman, who works there, who is standing there. And I don't know, I have this thing that happens on occasion here in Tucson, and that is people will begin talking to me with the natural assumption that I know they listen to my show. And so it's not unlike individuals in public, if you're wearing a Star Wars t-shirt, to engage a stranger in a conversation in a friendly environment, right? Well, I have this added thing where I don't know if it's because they know me because of the show or just because I'm wearing a Star Wars t-shirt, or both. So I'm getting out of line, and this guy says, "Hey, so who do you think Rey's parents are?" And it was, again, another example, anecdotal, but another example of just how much Star Wars has really captured the imaginations of everybody. But I was watching Sicario with Melinda over the weekend. A great movie, by the way, fantastic movie. But as I'm watching this film, There's no way I'll go and digest Sicario, which is a great movie, the way that I have Star Wars. I'm not sitting back going, well, I really wish I had the backstory of Emily Blunt's character and how she went to go become, this law enforcement agent. And boy, this stuff that happened with Benicio del Toro's character, we don't do that with almost any other movie. We just accept that fact. We accepted that fact when Star Wars A New Hope came out. But it tells you the difficulty that Disney has and why Disney went and did what it did in going backwards to go forwards. They had to go and reestablish this franchise so that they could go continue movies. If they went and did the George Lucas route where they updated everything and we got new Resistance ships that were not X-Wing fighters, if we got TIE fighters that weren't TIE fighters, something different for the First Order, it could have worked. But then there would have been, it didn't feel like my original trilogy. They had to go and mix in both elements. And they pulled it off. They absolutely pulled it off. If you look at the art book, I have no doubt that when we get to episode 8 and 9, we'll begin to see other ships. There are storylines and points in some of the visual dictionaries and in the art book that show that there are other ships and vehicles out there. They just chose to leave them out. The Resistance was made up of a very, very small group that wasn't combined of a bunch of different worlds like in the original trilogy where you had the Mon Calamari and you had these different capital ships that belonged to these different entities. You had them here, but it was very small and focused, and so they only had X-Wing fighters. And look, we got variances on the TIE fighter. There was the First Order Special Forces TIE and the regular TIE. But I believe moving forward, now that they've established everything, kind of kept it simple and stripped down, that as we move forward, we'll end up getting more of a variety of what we're kind of used to. And that follows, again, the trend of what we got in the original trilogy. In the original trilogy, in A New Hope, it was fairly basic. You had Y-Wings and X-Wing fighters. That's pretty much it, along with the TIE fighters. So getting back to what I opened the podcast up with China, just really quick. It's going to... The Force Awakens has now reached number 1, biggest domestic box office ever. Now, let's see, according to the article, where are we at? Let me look through here. Trying to think of where we are now. So internationally, The Force Awakens picked up another 104.3 million over the weekend. Brings its overall worldwide haul to $1.73 billion. It is now the third highest grossing movie in history, and it's past Jurassic World's $1.67 billion global gross. And now again, this is globally. In domestically, it's reached the number 1 spot. So my understanding is we still have Titanic and Avatar to go. It's got to cross the $2 billion mark to beat them, to become number 1. And there are still people saying that to reach that number 1 mark globally past Avatar is still going to be a tall order. But it brings me to the question of why do we care, right? I mean, I follow this stuff. I'm actually going to Variety.com now. I have no reason to go to Variety.com. I go to Deadline.com. I have no reason to go to Deadline.com, but I'm watching this movie, and I want to see how it's doing. And many people do. I've heard many different podcasts talk about and continue to talk about the box office grosses, and other hosts talk about how much they care about this film and how well it does. And look, the truth of the matter is we as fans want it to be successful, just like we want anything that we love to be successful. It's no different than me wanting to see Dale Earnhardt Jr. win a race and a championship. It's no different than people wanting to see the Green Bay Packers win today, even though I want to see the Redskins win. We love that validation. We like being a part of something great. I won't bring politics into this, but I host a political show Monday through Friday. That's my full-time job. But regardless of how you feel about Donald Trump, I think one of the biggest driving factors that allows people to basically give Donald Trump a free pass for all the ridiculous stuff that he says is because they want to feel like America is exceptional again. They want us to be great. We want to be a part of something successful. And that is, I mean, that's our children playing sports. That's our children and their grades. That's our jobs. That's our sports teams that we love. And that's the movies that we endure. And the fandom is so strong and so devoted that it means